A poor young nurse was hired to take care of a disabled guy in the hospital, not knowing he's a millionaire, and fell in love with her. The hospital bustled with activity, its fluorescent-lit halls filled with hurried footsteps, muffled voices, and the rhythmic beeping of machines. Nurses darted from room to room, their scrubs a blur of color against the stark white walls. Patients waited impatiently on gurneys or in chairs, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and muted tension. Anna adjusted the strap of her overstuffed bag on her shoulder as she weaved through the chaos. Her shift had just started, but the exhaustion from juggling long hours at work and caring for her younger brother at home clung to her like a second skin. Anna called a fellow nurse as she passed the station. "You're assigned to room 4002 today. Good luck with that one." Anna paused, her brow furrowing. "Why do I need luck?" The nurse shrugged, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. "You'll see." Pushing back her apprehension, Anna made her way to room 4002, her sensible shoes squeaking softly against the linoleum as she stepped inside. Her gaze landed on the patient sitting by the window, James. He sat in a wheelchair, his broad shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the view outside. The sunlight streaming through the window did little to soften the hard lines of his face. There was an air of bitterness about him, a palpable wall that seemed to push everything and everyone away. "Good morning, Mr. Black," Anna said, her tone professional but warm. James didn't turn around. "Don't bother," he said coldly. "I don't need another nurse pretending to care." Anna blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness of his tone. She stepped further into the room, her hand tightening slightly on the clipboard she carried. "I'm not pretending. I'm your nurse for today." James let out a harsh laugh, finally turning to face her, his piercing blue eyes locked onto hers, filled with a mixture of defiance and pain. "Is that supposed to mean something? You'll just be another face that comes and goes." Anna's lips pressed into a thin line. She had dealt with difficult patients before, but there was something about James's words that struck a chord. She took a steadying breath, setting the clipboard down on the small table beside his bed. "I understand you're frustrated," she said evenly, "but I'm here to help you, whether you like it or not." "I don't need help," James snapped, his voice rising. "What I need is for everyone to leave me alone." Anna's patience, her usual calm demeanor, cracked. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "Look, Mr. Black, I'm not here to pity you or to waste your time. I'm here to do my job, and whether you cooperate or not is entirely up to you. But I'll tell you this, your attitude isn't going to make things any easier for either of us." James stared at her, clearly not expecting such a firm response. For a moment, the room was silent, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Finally, he leaned back in his wheelchair, his expression guarded. "You're not like the others," he muttered, almost to himself. Anna arched a brow. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" James smirked faintly, but said nothing, turning his gaze back to the window. Anna resisted the urge to roll her eyes, instead turning her attention to his chart. "Fine, let's start with the basics. I need to check your vitals and review your medications." James didn't respond, but he didn't resist as she began her routine. His silence, though heavy with resentment, was a small victory in her eyes. As Anna worked, she stole glances at him, noting the faint stubble on his jawline and the tension in his posture. He was young, mid-30s at most, and carried himself with a confidence that hadn't been entirely stripped away by his condition. Yet beneath the surface, she could see the cracks. "You don't have to talk to me," she said after a while, her tone softer now, "but if you ever decide you want to, I'll listen." James didn't look at her, but the slight clench of his jaw betrayed that her words had reached him. When Anna finished her tasks, she straightened and grabbed the clipboard. "I'll be back in a few hours to check on you," she said as she turned to leave. James's voice stopped her. "You won't last," he said, his tone laced with challenge. Anna paused, glancing over her shoulder. "We'll see about that." With that, she stepped out of the room, her heart pounding from the confrontation. She had no idea what had led James to this point in his life, but one thing was clear. He wasn't just fighting his physical condition, he was fighting the world and himself. Anna didn't know how the day would unfold, but she was determined to prove James wrong, and perhaps in doing so, she would uncover the man hidden behind the walls he had built so high. Anna slumped into the staff lounge during her short break, running a hand through her hair as she tried to push the morning's confrontation with James out of her mind. The other nurses were gathered in clusters, their voices low as they gossiped and shared complaints about their shifts. "Hey, Anna," one of them called out, a smug smile on her face. "How's room 4002 treating you?" Anna looked up, her tired eyes narrowing slightly. "Unpredictable, that's putting it mildly," another nurse chimed in, chuckling. "He's impossible, refuses to let anyone get close." "I'm surprised he hasn't scared you off yet." Anna straightened in her chair, her jaw tightening. She was used to being underestimated. Her plain scrubs, unpolished demeanor, and the faint accent from her working-class upbringing often made her the target of quiet mockery, but she refused to let their words get to her. "I can handle it," she said simply, rising from her seat. As she left the lounge, she thought about her family. Her younger brother Danny was counting on her to keep him in school, and her mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. Anna had no choice but to work harder than everyone else, even if it meant dealing with patients like James. James sat by the window in his room, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair as he stared out at the bustling street below. The people out there, so free to move, to live their lives, felt like a cruel reminder of what he'd lost. Before the accident, his life had been everything he dreamed of. He was a self-made millionaire, a confident, ambitious man who thrived on challenges and basked in his success. But now, he was confined to this chair, his independence stripped away, his body a shell of what it once was. He kept his identity a secret, refusing to let the nurses or doctors know who he really was. The last thing he wanted was their pity or, worse, their opportunistic smiles as they tried to curry favor with a rich man. The sound of the door opening pulled him from his thoughts. Anna walked in, her expression calm but determined. She carried a tray with his medications and a clipboard. Her steps measured as she approached. "Good afternoon, Mr. Black," she said, her tone professional. James didn't look at her, his gaze still fixed on the window. "What now?" More poking and prodding. Anna set the tray down on the table beside him. "Just your medication and a quick check of your vitals, nothing too invasive." He scoffed, his lips curling into a bitter smirk. "How considerate." Anna ignored his sarcasm and pulled out her stethoscope. "Let's start with your blood pressure." James reluctantly extended his arm, his movement stiff and reluctant, as she wrapped the cuff around his arm. He studied her face, noticing the faint dark circles under her eyes and the determined set of her jaw. "You don't strike me as the type who gives up easily," he said suddenly. Anna glanced at him, momentarily surprised by the observation. "No, I don't." "Why?" he pressed. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Because I can't afford to." James raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "What's that supposed to mean?" Anna finished recording his blood pressure and turned to face him. "It means I have responsibilities. People depending on me, my brother, my mom. Giving up isn't an option." For a brief moment, James's expression softened, but he quickly masked it with his usual air of indifference. "Must be exhausting being everyone's savior." Anna smiled faintly, not as exhausting as being miserable all the time. James stiffened, her words hitting a nerve. "You don't know anything about me." "You're right," Anna said, meeting his gaze, "but I do know that shutting everyone out won't help you. You're not the only one who's been through something difficult." James's jaw tightened, and he turned his chair slightly, effectively ending the conversation. The rest of the day passed in a tense rhythm. Anna checked on James periodically, each visit met with curt responses and pointed glares. Despite his resistance, she remained patient, her steady demeanor unwavering. Late in the afternoon, Anna returned to his room to find him struggling to reach a book on the bedside table. His wheelchair was angled awkwardly, and his expression was a mix of frustration and stubborn pride. "Let me help you," Anna said, stepping forward. "I've got it," James snapped, his hand slipping from the book. Anna didn't back down. She picked up the book and held it out to him. Here. James glared at her but took the book reluctantly. I didn't ask for your help. And I didn't ask for your approval, Anna replied, her tone even. James stared at her, his frustration momentarily eclipsed by a flicker of admiration. She was different, unapologetically honest and unafraid to challenge him. As Anna left the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to James than his harsh words and guarded demeanor, and as much as he tried to push her away, she was determined to reach him. For James, her resilience was both infuriating and strangely comforting. For the first time in a long while, he found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to face his struggles alone. The room was quiet when Anna entered for her afternoon rounds. James sat by the window as usual, his wheelchair positioned to face the city skyline. But this time, something caught her attention. A book balanced on his lap. The hardcover had a sleek black design with bold gold letters, Principles of Investment Strategy. Anna hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. Light reading, I see, she said with a small smile. James glanced up briefly, then returned his attention to the book. Something like that. Her curiosity piqued. Anna crossed the room and began tidying the tray table. I didn't peg you as the type to be interested in investment strategies. He closed the book with a quiet snap, his gaze sharp. What type did you peg me as? Anna shrugged, meeting his eyes without hesitation. Someone who pretends not to care, but clearly does. Otherwise, you wouldn't be reading something so. She gestured toward the book, involved. James's lips twitched, the faintest trace of a smile threatening to break through. Fair point. Encouraged by his lack of hostility, Anna leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. So, are you reading for fun, or are you planning to become the next Warren Buffett? James smirked faintly. I think it's safe to say my days of dominating the financial world are behind me, Anna. Anna tilted her head, intrigued. The financial world? That's a pretty specific phrase. He realized his slip too late, his smirk fading into something guarded. It's just an interest of mine, keeps my mind occupied. Anna didn't press further, sensing his reluctance. Instead, she changed tactics. Well, it's good to keep your mind active. A lot of patients I've worked with struggle to find purpose during recovery. It's nice to see you doing something for yourself. James watched her carefully, searching for any hint of condescension. When he found none, he relaxed slightly. Yeah, well, it's not like I have much else to do. Anna smiled. You'd be surprised how many people choose Netflix over self-improvement. You've already got them beat. James chuckled, a low, unexpected sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. Over the next few days, their interactions grew less strained. Anna made a habit of asking about the books James was reading, carefully steering the conversations toward topics he seemed comfortable discussing. One afternoon, as she checked his vitals, she noticed another book on his bedside table. This one was about venture capital and startup funding. You know, Anna said casually, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around his arm, you've got quite the collection of business books. Ever thought about teaching a class? James arched a brow. Teaching? Yeah, she said, jotting down his numbers. You clearly know a lot. You could probably give those Ivy League professors a run for their money. James let out a dry laugh. Doubtful. Besides, people like me don't exactly inspire confidence these days. Anna paused, lowering her clipboard. Why do you say that? He shrugged, his gaze dropping to his lap. Because I'm stuck in this chair. People see the wheelchair before they see me. Anna's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. She stepped closer, her expression softening. I don't see a wheelchair when I look at you, James. I see someone who's smart, determined, and if I'm being honest, a little too stubborn for his own good. James looked up, his eyes searching hers for sincerity. You don't pity me? No, she said firmly, I respect you. There's a difference. For a moment, James was silent, his defenses wavering. You're not like the others, he said quietly. Anna smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. Their conversation became a regular part of Anna's visits. She learned that James had a sharp wit and a deep understanding of finance, though he rarely shared details about his past. Whenever she tried to dig deeper, he skillfully redirected the conversation. One day, however, his guard slipped. Anna had just finished helping him with his physical therapy exercises when she noticed a stack of papers on the table. Among them was a detailed business plan, complete with projections and market analyses. She picked it up, skimming the first page. "This is impressive," she said, her brows furrowing. "Did you write this?" James stiffened, reaching for the papers. "It's nothing, just an old project." Anna held on to them for a moment longer, her curiosity deepening. "Old project?" "No, this looks like it's straight out of a Harvard case study. Where did you learn to do this?" He hesitated, his expression unreadable. "I used to work in finance," he admitted reluctantly. Anna's eyes widened. "Really? That explains a lot. You're not just reading those books, you live them." James nodded, though his gaze remained distant. "Yeah, I live them. Built a company from the ground up. It was everything to me." Anna noticed the shift in his tone, the hint of pain beneath the words. She set the papers down gently. "What happened?" James took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. "An accident. It changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't the man people respected. I was just someone they pitied." Anna's chest tightened. "That must have been incredibly hard." "It was," James admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "It still is." Anna stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You're still that man, James. You're still capable of so much. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you otherwise." He looked at her, his eyes softening in a way she hadn't seen before. "You really believe that?" "I do," she said with quiet conviction. For the first time in months, James felt a spark of something he thought he'd lost. The hospital was unusually quiet that morning, the steady hum of activity muted by the early hour. Anna walked briskly down the hall, her clipboard in hand, ready to begin her rounds. Room 4002 was her first stop, as it had been for weeks now. As she approached James's room, she slowed her pace, noticing the door was slightly ajar. Inside, muffled voices floated out, a man and a woman, their tones hushed but unmistakably intense. "He's been like this ever since the accident," the man said, his voice heavy with frustration. "What did you expect, Brian?" the woman replied sharply. "James's pride has always been his downfall. He's too stubborn to accept help, even from us." Anna frowned, her curiosity piqued. She peeked through the crack in the door and saw a well-dressed